In this video, I'm going to be adding a cantilevered extension to my workshop to make it as unobstructive in my garden as possible. And the extension is going to be mounted directly to the uprights of my existing workshop wall. And it's a bit of an experiment because I'm not entirely sure how much weight that can take. But we'll find out. The plan is to use the additional space for a new dust collection system for my workshop and a cyclone as well. And after drawing up a model of what I want to build in 3D on SketchUp, I decided to make it a little bit bigger so that it can also accommodate my air compressor. I'll also be adding some sound insulation to the extension in order to minimize the amount of noise from the air compressor and the new dust collection system. For the frame of the extension, I would use spruce, as I had quite a lot of it in my workshop already, and it's good for construction and lightweight. All the pieces I had were 38mm thick, so I set my table saw fence to 38mm and ripped some 38mm square lengths. I used the miter saw to cut the pieces to length based on the dimensions from my drawings. First I'd make two rectangles to form the side panels of the extension. I drilled pilot holes and used glue and screwed butt joints for the joinery. These rectangles would be mounted to the uprights of the workshop wall. I first marked up a plumb line using a spirit level to use as a guide. And I could use the existing screws that were holding the cladding in place to indicate where the centre of the uprights were. I decided to use these concrete screws for mounting the frame. My uncle gave me a tub full of these a while back and they are very long and very strong. I drilled a 6mm pilot hole through the frame and into the upright into the wall and added the first screw. Then I could check for plumb using the first screw as a pivot point and add more screws to secure it. To get the next side panel at the same level, I first used a clamp to hold it roughly in place, and then I could use the spirit level taped to a 3x2 and make the necessary adjustments from there. I secured that to the wall in the same way. Next I marked up the position of the side panels onto the 3x2. This piece would form one of the floor supports. I cut it to length on the miter saw and then marked up the material I wanted to remove in order to create a lap joint. I cut the joint by setting my circular saw blade height to the depth of the joint and then made a series of cuts. I could then remove the bulk of the material using a hammer and clean it up with a chisel. I could then secure the floor support to the side panels with glue and screws. I cut 4 of these pieces in total, 2 to support the floor and 2 to support the roof. The pieces that would support the roof were added in the same way but upside down. The next part of the frame was probably the most important part, a diagonal brace for the side panels. I first cut a 45-degree end on the miter saw, then I could offer it up and mark it up for length and make the next cut on that mark. The diagonal brace got glued and screwed in place. These will add a lot of strength and rigidity to the frame. The frame for the extension spanned 2 more uprights in the wall towards the centre of the extension, so I cut another piece of spruce as a filler piece so that I could secure the frame to those uprights too. I did this to the top panel or roof as well. Next I added some floor support struts. These were attached with glue and screws through the front, and I drilled some pilot holes at an angle to secure them at the back.
I also ripped and added some small pieces to make up the difference in height between the bottom of the side panels and the top of the floor supports. And the top panel got a central support brace too. I bought a new sheet of OSB and I'd use this for the floor and the roof. I measured and cut the OSB to size with my circular saw, and I cut a couple of notches out on the corners to fit around the frame. The main reason I fitted this piece of OSB next was because it would come in really handy as a shelf while I was working. I just called my local sawmill to check if they had any more of the same shiplap cladding that I used on my workshop so that I could use the same stuff on the extension. Unfortunately, they've only got 4.8 metre lengths in stock, and those lengths are too long to fit through my house. So I asked if they could cut them in half and deliver them, but they wanted to charge me £25 for delivery and a further £15 to cut them in half. And we're only talking about £30 worth of wood. And I'm not crazy about the idea of spending £70 on £30 worth of wood. So I've packed up some tools and I'm going to drive over there, cut it down myself and load up my car.
All good?
Yeah, sort of.
Ah!
Gotta get it in there.
And a recorder as well. Lovely job.
I already had a couple of pieces of the cladding at home which were left over from the workshop build 3 or 4 years ago, but I didn't have enough for the whole extension. I used my circular saw to cut the cladding down to length so that it would fit in my car.
Job done.
Before adding the cladding, I decided to start working on the roof as it was due to rain. I wanted to cut some angled roof trusses and there was an obstacle to work around, this security light. I measured up the height of that from the frame and made a mark on a piece of spruce that was about 15mm less than that measurement. I used my tapering jig on the table saw to cut the angled trusses, finishing off the cuts on the bandsaw. These pieces were glued and screwed to the top of the frame. I offered up another piece of OSB for the roof and all looked good. I had an old scrap of sapele and I glued and screwed this to what would be the front edge of the roof panel. This would just give me something solid to later tack the roof felt into. I could then secure the roof panel to the top of the frame. I got a roll of this roof felt from my local reclamation yard and I cut a piece to length and added it to the roof. This fitted nicely underneath the security light as planned. I ripped down the top of one of the pieces of cladding using my circular saw and I'd used this to secure the roof felt to the top of the roof. And typically this is when it started raining. I cut the corner of the roof felt away and then slid it in place underneath the security light and then added the ripped down piece of cladding using some screws. I didn't film this part because of the rain, but this is how it looks now it's fitted. Then I added some roofing tacks to secure the felt to the piece of sapele that I added to the OSB earlier. I could then trim off the excess roof felt with an old knife. I also added some more sapele to the sides of the OSB roof panel and the roof felt got attached to that in the same way. Next I started cutting the cladding to length using my speed square to guide the cuts. and I could then start adding the cladding to the side panels. I used one screw in the centre of each cladding piece. This will allow for seasonal movement as the wood expands and contracts.